The only thing that can prevent these attacks from continuing and escalating and expanding and possibly into regional war is a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. And that is because Hezbollah has linked its attacks on Israel, which have been going on for 10 months now on a daily basis. They've linked that directly to the situation in Gaza.
Tensions between Israel and Hezbollah are rising after two sides launched cross-border strikes against each other. Hezbollah says it's fired more than 340 rockets and dozens of drones in response to Israel's killing of Fouad Shukur, the group's military commander. Now, the Israeli Defense Force said that 100 of its jets had launched airstrikes across the southern Lebanon in what it called a preemptive strike, killing 6 militants. So what does this further escalation mean for the two sides? Will there be a wider war across the region, or has a dangerous moment passed? Well, let's speak to Jotam Confino, Middle East correspondent for the Daily Telegraph, who is in Herzliya, north of Tel Aviv. Jotam, thanks for giving us your time. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
Jotam, you're north of Tel Aviv. What's the atmosphere like there?
So people go about their daily lives, really. There's no change in the guidelines coming from the IDF Home Front Command. There was a couple of hours after Israel's preemptive attack in Lebanon, where Israelis were told, first of all, not to go to the beaches, but also to stay close to bomb shelters. Now, that was lifted already during the day, a couple of hours after the attack. So we're back to normal here, but it doesn't mean that the threat is over. As Hezbollah has said, and most recently Iran also, this is not over. This was just the first phase of retaliatory attacks for the killing of a top Hezbollah commander in Beirut last month, but also for the killing of Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran last month. Just today, Iran said that they're determined to carry out a strike when the time is right. In other words, they're repeating the same threat that they have been sending to Israel for nearly a month now.
So in your view, has this moment passed? We see this sort of tit-for-tat attack happen over and over again. Is this the end of that small conflict? Well, when I say small conflict, I don't mean to belittle the situation, but we've just seen that preemptive strike and the retaliation from Hezbollah. Is that going to be the end of it, or do you feel that there is more to come?
There is more to come. I believe that there is. The only thing that can prevent these attacks from continuing and escalating and expanding and possibly into regional war is a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. And that is because Hezbollah has linked its attacks on Israel, which have been going on for 10 months now on a daily basis. They've linked that directly to the situation in Gaza. In other words, if there's a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, they will stop attacking Israel. So the only thing that can prevent this from spiraling out of control is a ceasefire. Now, those talks are not going particularly well. Depending on who you ask. If you ask Hamas, they have rejected the latest demands set forward by Israel in Cairo. When I speak to Israeli officials, they say that some progress was made and they are really trying to hammer this deal out because they know that it is possibly the last chance to get the hostages out.
We've also been getting reports from Gaza of water turning brown and diseases spreading wildly. A baby has contracted a first case of polio in 25 years. What's going on in terms of humanitarian aid to the people that need it within Gaza, Jotam?
So there is a huge obstacle here when it comes to humanitarian aid. Well, several, actually. Let's start with the biggest one currently, and that is the closure of the Rafah border crossing, which is really the main border crossing where humanitarian aid was entering from Egypt into Gaza. Now, that border crossing has been shut since May, after Israel took control of it, and Egypt and Israel are still fighting over this. But it doesn't mean that aid isn't coming in. There are several other border crossings where aid comes in on a daily basis, and also vaccines against polio. But it doesn't mean that it's enough. And one of the things that's really a huge challenge here is to get aid out to the civilians who need it. It's a war zone, and everyone who's seen pictures of Gaza knows exactly what it looks like. It's a war zone. It's incredibly dangerous to get this aid out. And maybe more importantly, Hamas is deliberately stealing some of this aid. It's not just Israelis saying it's also the few journalists who dare speak up about this. and of course also civilians inside Gaza who report this. And that is a major obstacle to getting the aid in to those who need it.
Let's look at what's happening within Israel. Every weekend, there are protests in the streets. What is happening with those protests? Are they continuing? And has the message changed? We've been covering these protests on the My Weekend show ever since they began. They were very much focused on the return of the hostages. The idea was do everything you can to get those hostages back. Now, the message seems to have changed to stop the war altogether. How are the Israeli people feeling about the future between Israel and Gaza?
First of all, a majority of Israelis, some 62%, would like to see a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, primarily because they want to get the hostages out. So that's why they go on the streets, but they're also incredibly frustrated with Prime Minister Netanyahu in general, even though he's actually made somewhat of a comeback in polls in recent months, and which is quite surprising, really, because right after October the 7th, most people basically said his career was over. This was the biggest tragedy in Israel's history from which he could not recover. Now, he's slowly actually making a comeback here in the polls. It doesn't change the fact that Israel is divided. Thousands of people go on the streets. They are demanding a ceasefire to get the hostages out, but they're also demanding fresh elections. Many of those who go on the street, they say it cannot be that nearly a year after the biggest atrocity committed against Jews since World War II, the government is continuing as nothing happened. They want a new government and they want elections.
Is that likely to happen?
I spoke to one of Netanyahu's former strategists the other day, and he said he believes that the government will fall sometime in 2025, which is next year, due to a couple of things. First of all, there are many internal disputes inside Netanyahu's coalition. Some of his far-right ministers are extremely unhappy with the way that he's handling Hezbollah in the north. They would like to see him go to war. He hasn't done so. But there are also the issue of drafting ultra-Orthodox youth to the army, which has actually toppled his coalition, his government previously in 2018. So it's quite interesting to see that there are so many obstacles that could topple him. And this is why this strategist said that possibly in 2025, it will all be too much and he will have to call for elections.
Jotam, thanks for giving us your time. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Jotam Confino there, Middle East correspondent for the Daily Telegraph, who was speaking to us from Herzliya, north of Tel Aviv.